She stood frozen at the altar in her white dress, watching her fiancé kiss her own sister while their wedding guests gasped in shock. But when a familiar voice echoed through the chapel saying, quote, "Ject," everything changed. The man walking down that aisle wasn't just any guest. He was the billionaire she'd walked away from 3 years ago, and what he did next left everyone speechless. Sarah Martinez had dreamed of this day since she was 7 years old, twirling in her mother's old nightgown and pretending it was a wedding dress. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Now, 26 years later, she stood in the bridal suite of St. Catherine's Chapel, staring at her reflection in the antique mirror her grandmother had insisted on bringing from Mexico. The ivory silk gown hugged her curves perfectly, the delicate lace sleeves that had taken months to custom make framing her olive skin beautifully. Everything was exactly as she had envisioned, down to the tiny pearl buttons that ran down the back and the cathedral-length veil that had belonged to 3 generations of Martinez women. Her wedding day had finally arrived, and Michael Torres, the man she'd been planning to marry for the past year and a half, was waiting for her at the altar. They had met during their residency at Chicago General Hospital, both working grueling shifts in the emergency department. Sarah specialized in pediatric emergency medicine, while Michael had chosen trauma surgery. Their relationship had bloomed over shared exhaustion, stolen moments in supply closets, and late-night conversations about saving lives and building a future together. The chapel buzzed with excitement as 200 guests filled the mahogany pews. Sarah's extended family had traveled from across the country, aunts and uncles from California, cousins from Texas, and her beloved grandmother Esperanza, who had flown in from Guadalajara despite her fear of airplanes. Michael's family, prominent members of Chicago's medical community, occupied the right side of the church. His father, Dr. Edmund Torres, was the chief of cardiology at Northwestern Memorial, while his mother, Victoria, ran one of the city's most successful medical charity foundations. In the months leading up to the wedding, Sarah had thrown herself into planning every detail. She had chosen the flowers herself, white peonies mixed with dusty miller and eucalyptus, creating elegant arrangements that filled the chapel with a subtle, romantic fragrance. The reception venue, the historic Palmer House Hotel, had been booked 18 months in advance. She had tasted dozens of cake flavors before settling on vanilla bean with raspberry filling, the same combination her parents had chosen for their wedding 32 years ago. Every invitation had been hand-addressed in calligraphy. Every centerpiece personally approved. Every song on the playlist carefully selected to tell the story of her and Michael's love. But as Sarah adjusted her veil one final time, something felt different. There was a tension in the air that she couldn't quite identify, a nervous energy that seemed to radiate from her sister Emma, who was bustling around the bridal suite in her burgundy maid-of-honor dress. Emma had been acting strangely all week, avoiding eye contact during the rehearsal dinner and seeming distracted during what should have been joyful moments of preparation. When Sarah had asked if everything was okay, Emma had simply smiled and said she was nervous about her maid-of-honor speech. Emma Martinez was 2 years younger than Sarah, but they had always been incredibly close. Growing up, they had shared everything: clothes, secrets, dreams about their futures. Emma had been Sarah's biggest supporter throughout medical school, sending care packages during exam periods and celebrating every milestone. When Sarah had gotten engaged, Emma had been the first person she called, and her sister's excitement had felt genuine and infectious. Emma had helped choose the bridesmaid dresses, had thrown Sarah an elaborate bachelorette party in Nashville, and had been by her side for every dress fitting and vendor meeting. Now, as Sarah watched Emma in the mirror, she noticed her sister's hands were trembling as she arranged the train of the wedding dress. Emma's usual bright chatter was replaced by an almost desperate cheerfulness that felt forced and artificial. When their mother, Rosa Martinez, entered the bridal suite carrying the family rosary that Sarah would carry instead of a bouquet, Emma practically jumped away from Sarah as if she had been caught doing something wrong. Rosa Martinez looked radiant in her navy blue mother-of-the-bride dress, her graying hair styled in an elegant updo that showcased the diamond earrings Sarah's father had given her for their 25th anniversary. She had been looking forward to this day almost as much as Sarah, spending months helping with preparations while working her job as a high school principal. Rosa had immigrated to the United States from Mexico when she was 19, and seeing her daughters succeed in America, Sarah as a doctor, Emma, as a successful marketing executive, filled her with immense pride. "Mija, you look absolutely beautiful," Rosa whispered, tears already forming in her eyes as she handed Sarah the rosary. The beads were worn smooth from decades of prayers, and Sarah felt a deep connection to the generations of women in her family who had carried this same rosary on their wedding days. "Your father would be so proud." Sarah's father, Carlos Martinez, had passed away from a heart attack 2 years earlier. His absence was the one shadow on what should have been the happiest day of her life. He had been her greatest champion, working double shifts at the construction company to help pay for her medical school, never missing a graduation or important milestone. Sarah knew he would have loved Michael, would have appreciated his dedication to medicine and his respectful treatment of the Martinez family. As the wedding march began to play, Sarah took a deep breath and linked arms with her uncle Roberto, who had agreed to walk her down the aisle in her father's place. The chapel doors opened, and she began the long walk toward the altar where Michael stood waiting. He looked handsome in his black tuxedo, his dark hair perfectly styled, a nervous but genuine smile spreading across his face as he saw her approaching. The guests rose to their feet, and Sarah could hear murmurs of appreciation for how beautiful she looked. But as she walked down the aisle, Sarah noticed that Michael's eyes seemed to be looking past her, focusing on something or someone behind her. She assumed he was taking in the full picture, the bridal party, the decorations, the culmination of all their planning. Emma walked just behind her as maid of honor, and Sarah could hear the rustling of her sister's dress as they made their way toward the altar. The ceremony began beautifully. Father Gonzalez, who had baptized both Sarah and Emma, spoke eloquently about love, commitment, and the sacred bond of marriage. Sarah and Michael had written their own vows, and when it was Michael's turn to speak, he looked directly into her eyes and promised to love, honor, and cherish her for the rest of his life. His voice was steady and confident, and for a moment, all of Sarah's pre-wedding anxiety melted away. This was the man she loved, the partner she had chosen to build a life with, and they were finally becoming husband and wife. The first sign that something was wrong came during the exchange of rings. As Sarah slipped the platinum band onto Michael's finger, she noticed that his hands were sweating more than usual, and he seemed to be having trouble focusing on Father Gonzalez's words. She attributed it to normal wedding nerves. After all, she was feeling overwhelmed by emotion herself, but there was something in Michael's expression that didn't quite match the joy of the moment. When Father Gonzalez reached the traditional moment in the ceremony and asked if anyone had a reason why Sarah and Michael should not be wed, the chapel fell into the expected silence. Sarah smiled, knowing this was just a formality, a tradition that rarely resulted in actual objections. She was already thinking ahead to their first kiss as husband and wife, to the reception where they would dance to "At Last" by Etta James, the song that had been playing when Michael first told her he loved her. But instead of silence, Michael's voice cut through the quiet chapel. "I do." The words hung in the air like a physical presence. Sarah blinked, certain she had misheard. The guests shifted uncomfortably in their seats, murmurs of confusion beginning to ripple through the chapel. Father Gonzalez looked as stunned as everyone else, clearly having never encountered this situation in his 40 years of performing weddings. "Michael?" Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. "What did you say?" Michael took a step back from the altar, his face pale, but his expression resolute. "I said, I object." "I can't do this, Sarah. I can't marry you." The chapel erupted in gasps and confused chatter. Sarah felt as though the ground was shifting beneath her feet, as though she was watching this scene happen to someone else. This couldn't be real. This couldn't be happening on what was supposed to be the happiest day of her life. "I don't understand," Sarah said, her voice growing stronger despite the shock. "Michael, what's going on? What are you talking about?" Michael looked around the chapel, his eyes landing on every face except Sarah's. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, but I can't go through with this. I don't love you the way you deserve to be loved." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. Around her, she could hear her mother crying, could see her grandmother crossing herself and whispering prayers in Spanish. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Uncle Roberto stepped closer to her side, his protective instincts kicking in, even as he struggled to understand what was happening. You don't love me? Sarah repeated, her voice hollow. Michael, we've been together for 3 years. We live together. We've planned this entire life together. What do you mean you don't love me? Michael finally met her eyes, and what Sarah saw there broke her heart completely. It wasn't confusion or fear or even regret. It was guilt. Deep and overwhelming guilt, mixed with something that looked almost like relief. I love someone else, Michael said quietly, but his words carried clearly through the now silent chapel. I've been trying to fight it, trying to do the right thing, but I can't marry you when my heart belongs to someone else. Sarah felt her world crumbling around her. Who? She whispered, though part of her already knew the answer from the way Michael's eyes had been searching the chapel, from Emma's strange behavior all week, from the pieces that were suddenly falling into place with horrible clarity. Michael's gaze moved past Sarah to where Emma stood frozen in her burgundy maid of honor dress. Emma, he said simply. I'm in love with Emma. The gasps that followed were louder this time, mixed with shocked exclamations and the sound of Sarah's grandmother crying out in Spanish. Sarah turned slowly to look at her sister, the woman who had been her best friend, her confidant, her partner in everything for 26 years. Emma's face was streaked with tears, but she wasn't denying Michael's words. Instead, she was looking at him with an expression that Sarah had never seen before, a look of desperate love and gratitude that he had finally spoken the truth. Sarah, Emma whispered, reaching out toward her sister, I'm so sorry. I never meant for this to happen. We tried to stop it, we really did, but how long? Sarah's voice cut through Emma's explanation like ice. How long has this been going on? Emma and Michael exchanged a look that spoke of months of hidden conversations, stolen moments, and shared guilt. It was Michael who answered. 6 months, he said quietly. It started at your birthday party in January. Emma and I were talking, and we realized we had so much in common, and then one thing led to another. We tried to end it, Sarah. We tried so many times, but we couldn't stay away from each other. Sarah's birthday party, the celebration she had planned to mark turning 26, surrounded by everyone she loved most. The party where she had been so happy, so grateful for her life and her relationships, while her fiancé and her sister were beginning a secret affair that would destroy everything she held dear. You've been lying to me for 6 months, Sarah said, her voice growing stronger as anger began to replace shock. Both of you. Every day for 6 months, you've been lying to my face while planning my wedding, while I trusted you both completely. The chapel was completely silent now, except for the sound of crying from various guests who were beginning to understand the full scope of what was happening. Sarah could see Michael's parents in the front row, their faces pale with shock and embarrassment. Her own family looked devastated, Uncle Roberto's protective arm around her mother's shoulders as Rosa sobbed quietly. We never wanted to hurt you, Emma said, stepping closer despite the look of devastation on Sarah's face. Sarah, you have to believe me. I love you. You're my sister, and I never wanted this to happen. But it did happen, Sarah replied, her voice echoing through the chapel with a strength that surprised even her. It's been happening for months while I planned this wedding, while I trusted both of you, while I believed that the two people I loved most in the world would never betray me. She looked around the chapel at the 200 guests who had come to celebrate her wedding and were instead witnessing her public humiliation. These were people who had traveled from across the country, who had taken time off work, who had spent money on gifts and accommodations to be part of what they thought would be a joyful celebration. I need to get out of here, Sarah said, gathering her dress and beginning to walk down the aisle. But as she passed the front row, she stopped and turned back to face Michael and Emma, who were still standing at the altar looking lost and guilty. I hope you're happy together, she said, her voice carrying clearly through the chapel. I hope this love that was worth destroying our family and humiliating me in front of everyone we know is everything you thought it would be. With that, Sarah Martinez walked out of her own wedding, leaving behind the man she had planned to spend her life with, the sister she had trusted with everything, and the future she had so carefully constructed. As she pushed through the chapel doors, she could hear the chaos erupting behind her. Voices raised in shock and anger, her mother calling her name, and the sound of what should have been wedding music still playing softly in the background. Outside the chapel, the Chicago autumn air was crisp and cold against her bare arms. Sarah stood on the steps in her wedding dress, breathing deeply and trying to process what had just happened. Her entire life had changed in the span of 10 minutes. The man she loved was in love with her sister. The sister she trusted had been lying to her for months. The wedding she had planned for over a year had ended before it could even begin. As she stood there, still in shock, Sarah heard footsteps behind her. She turned, expecting to see her mother or Uncle Roberto, but instead found herself face to face with Marcus Chen, a man she hadn't seen in 3 years, but who had once meant everything to her. Marcus looked exactly as she remembered, tall and impeccably dressed, his dark hair styled perfectly, his presence commanding attention even in a crowd. But there was something different in his eyes, something softer than the intensity she remembered from their tumultuous relationship years earlier. "Hello, Sarah," Marcus said quietly, his voice cutting through the chaos in her mind like a lifeline. "I'm sorry I'm late." Marcus Chen stood before Sarah like a vision from another lifetime. 3 years had passed since their relationship had ended in a storm of arguments about priorities and futures that seemed incompatible. Back then, Marcus had been building his tech empire, working 18-hour days and expecting Sarah to understand that his ambition came first. Sarah had been focused on her medical residency, determined to save lives and make a difference in the world. They had loved each other fiercely, but their dreams had pulled them in opposite directions until something had to break. "What are you doing here?" Sarah whispered, still clutching her wedding dress as the Chicago wind whipped around them. Behind her, she could hear the chaos continuing inside the chapel as guests tried to process what had just happened. Marcus stepped closer, his expensive suit impeccable despite the emotional storm swirling around them. "I heard you were getting married. I had to come." "You had to come to my wedding? After 3 years of silence?" Sarah's voice cracked with exhaustion and disbelief. "Marcus, I just found out my fiancé is in love with my sister. I really can't handle whatever this is right now." "That's exactly why I'm here," Marcus said gently. "Sarah, there's something I need to tell you. Something I should have said 3 years ago." Before Sarah could respond, the chapel doors burst open and Emma rushed out, her burgundy dress catching on the heavy wooden door. Her mascara had run, creating dark streaks down her cheeks, and her carefully styled hair was beginning to fall from its pins. "Sarah, please, we need to talk," Emma pleaded, reaching for her sister's arm. "Let me explain what happened. It wasn't supposed to be like this." Sarah pulled away sharply. "Wasn't supposed to be like what, Emma? You weren't supposed to get caught? You and Michael weren't supposed to fall in love behind my back for 6 months while I planned my wedding?" "We tried to stop it," Emma said desperately. "We both tried. But Sarah, what Michael and I have, it's real. It's not something we could just turn off." Marcus watched this exchange with growing anger. "So you decided to wait until your sister was literally at the altar to tell her the truth? That's your idea of being honorable?" Emma turned to Marcus with confusion and irritation. "I'm sorry, who are you? This is a family matter." "I'm someone who actually cares about Sarah's happiness," Marcus replied coldly. "Unlike the people who were supposed to protect her." Sarah looked between Marcus and Emma, feeling overwhelmed by the surreal nature of the situation. "Emma, just go back inside. Tell everyone the reception is canceled. Tell them I'm sorry they came all this way for nothing." "Sarah, I'm not leaving you alone," Emma insisted. "You're my sister. I love you." "If you loved me, you wouldn't have done this," Sarah said quietly. "If you loved me, you would have told me the truth months ago instead of letting me plan a wedding to a man who was in love with someone else." Michael appeared in the chapel doorway, his bow tie undone and his face flushed with stress. "Sarah, please, can we talk privately? I know this looks terrible, but I need you to understand why this happened." "I understand perfectly," Sarah said, her voice growing stronger. "You fell in love with my sister and decided to humiliate me in front of everyone I care about, instead of being honest. What's there to understand?" Michael stepped closer, ignoring Marcus's presence entirely. "It wasn't supposed to happen this way. Emma and I talked about calling off the wedding weeks ago, but we didn't know how to tell you without destroying our families. So instead you decided to destroy me," Sarah replied. "That was your solution. Let me stand there in my wedding dress, in front of 200 people, and find out that way." Marcus moved protectively closer to Sarah. I think you've done enough damage. Both of you should leave her alone." Michael finally seemed to notice Marcus properly. "And you are?" "Someone who knows what Sarah is worth," Marcus said simply. "Someone who spent 3 years regretting letting her go." The words hung in the air as Sarah stared at Marcus in shock. She had never expected to see him again, let alone have him appear at the worst moment of her life, with declarations that sounded suspiciously like the ones she had longed to hear years ago. Inside the chapel, Sarah could hear her mother's voice calling her name, along with the sounds of guests beginning to file out. The reality of what had just happened was sinking in for everyone. There would be no wedding, no reception, no celebration. Just the wreckage of relationships, and the complicated task of explaining to 200 people why they had witnessed such a public disaster. "Sarah," Marcus said quietly, "there's something you need to know about why our relationship really ended." "Marcus, not now," Sarah said tiredly. "I can't handle any more revelations today." "This is important," Marcus insisted. 3 years ago, when I was working all those hours, building the company, I wasn't just being ambitious. I was trying to build something worthy of you. I knew you were going to be an incredible doctor, that you were going to change lives and make a difference in the world. I wanted to create something that would be worthy of that, worthy of you." Sarah felt tears beginning to form again. "You never told me that. You just kept working and expected me to understand." "I was afraid," Marcus admitted. "I was afraid that if I told you how much you meant to me, how much I was building everything for you, you'd feel pressured or trapped. I wanted you to choose me because you loved me, not because of what I could offer you." Emma and Michael exchanged uncomfortable glances, clearly feeling like intruders in this conversation, but unable to leave without resolving the situation with Sarah. "So you let me think you didn't care about our relationship," Sarah said, her voice breaking. "You let me think your company was more important than us." "I was an idiot," Marcus said simply. "I spent 3 years building an empire, and realizing that none of it meant anything without you. When I heard you were getting married, I knew I had to tell you the truth, even if it was too late." "It is too late," Sarah whispered. "Marcus, I'm not the same person I was 3 years ago. I've built a life, a career, relationships. Relationships with people who betray you," Marcus pointed out gently. "Sarah, I'm not asking you to marry me tomorrow. I'm just asking you to remember that there are people in this world who see your worth, who would never humiliate you or take you for granted." Michael stepped forward aggressively. "Look, I don't know who you think you are, but Sarah and I have been together for 3 years. We have a life together. And just because I made a mistake doesn't mean—" "A mistake?" Sarah turned on Michael with fury. "A 6-month affair with my sister is a mistake? Waiting until our wedding day to tell me is a mistake?" "Sarah, I love you," Michael said desperately. "Emma and I, it's complicated. But what you and I have built together—" "What we built was based on lies," Sarah interrupted. "Michael, you stood at that altar and told me you loved someone else. There's no coming back from that." Marcus pulled out his phone and showed Sarah the screen. "I've already called my driver. He's waiting around the corner. Let me take you away from here, just for today. You don't have to make any decisions or have any conversations you're not ready for. Just let me get you somewhere quiet where you can process all of this." Sarah looked at the phone, then at Marcus's face, then at Emma and Michael standing together looking guilty and desperate. The choice seemed surreal, but also somehow inevitable. "Sarah, please don't leave with him," Emma begged. "We're your family. We can work through this." "Family doesn't do what you did," Sarah said firmly. "Family tells the truth, even when it's hard." She took Marcus's arm and began walking toward the street. "Wait," Michael called after them. "Sarah, what about our apartment? What about your things? What about us figuring this out?" Sarah turned back one last time. "There is no us, Michael. There hasn't been for 6 months, apparently. I'll send someone for my things." As they reached the corner, a sleek black car was indeed waiting. Marcus opened the door for Sarah, and she slid inside, grateful for the privacy and quiet. As they drove away from the chapel, Sarah could see Emma and Michael standing on the steps, watching them leave. "Where are we going?" Sarah asked quietly. "Wherever you want," Marcus replied. "I have a jet waiting at O'Hare. We could go to California, New York, Paris. Anywhere you want to go to get away from all of this." Sarah leaned back against the leather seat and closed her eyes. 3 years ago, I thought you didn't care enough about our relationship to prioritize it. Today, I found out that the man I was going to marry was in love with my sister. I'm not sure I trust my judgment about anything anymore. Your judgment is fine, Marcus said gently. You trusted the people who were supposed to be trustworthy. That's not a flaw in your character, Sarah. That's a flaw in theirs. As Chicago passed by outside the windows, Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced in years. Not happiness exactly, but possibility. The future she had planned was gone, but maybe that wasn't entirely a bad thing. Marcus, she said quietly, tell me about your company. Tell me what you built. Marcus smiled. The first genuine smile she'd seen from him all day. I built something that could change the world, Sarah. But more importantly, I built something that could support the dreams of someone who wants to save it. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.